Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. This episode takes us to familiar territory. If you've watched our previous stories on Olga Moskalyova, Vitaly Nikolienko, and Alexei Ivanovsky, then you will know we are talking about the Russian Far East. We are returning to Kamchatka, to a beautiful place called Lake Kurilskoye. As you can see by our map, we are now near the center of 5 cases regarding attacks we previously discussed. The Senkabetsu bear attack on Hokkaido, Japan, the Kinshir Island attack, the Olga Moskalyova attack, and the Vitaly Nikolenko attack, and then the topic of today's episode. If you're picking up on a pattern here, you're not the only one. These islands are some of the most sparsely populated areas when it comes to humans, yet we've documented some of the most tragic, violent, and unfortunate bear attacks ever. After today's episode, you may agree with me that this area of the world is most likely the most dangerous in regard to deadly bear attacks. The location is beautiful Lake Kurilskoye. With its clear waters and cool temperatures, it receives very few visitors each year. Any visitors that may find their way there might be photographers, researchers, and possibly fishermen. Otherwise, you can count on solitude, peace, and bears. Lots of bears. Michio Hoshino is an extremely accomplished wildlife photographer, observer, and researcher in his mid-40s. He was born in Japan and moved to Alaska to photograph brown bears in the 70s. His photos, videos, and artwork have brought the farthest corners of the world into the canvas and lighting of galleries around the world. In 1996, he was hired to do photography on a documentary about brown bears in Kamchatka. The first few days of filming went great, but on day 3, the photography crew lucked upon a very large male brown bear that did not mind the crew approaching within a few yards of him while he fished. The bear would simply ignore the crew, and they recorded some amazing footage of the giant bruin as it gorged itself on salmon just a few meager yards away from their lenses. The next day they returned to the same spot, and there he was again. He seemed to relish the spotlight and played and showed off for the crews. He was not aggressive or threatening in any way, even though the photographers would sometimes approach within 5 yards to film him eating. The crew continued this for a 3rd day and decided to make the hike to the lake to watch the big bear fish as part of their regular trip to gather footage. The big bear seemed content as he pulled in huge salmon and effortlessly tore them apart right in front of the crew. Some of these fish weighed about half as much as the men watching. It was on the 4th day, during the morning hike up the trail, that the crew noticed large piles of scat close to their camp in the trail to the big bear's fishing hole. They continued their hike and noticed his tracks and scat were placed over their boot tracks in the trail from when they returned to camp the prior day. Well, this is bear country, and we are hiking on a bear trail, so a certain amount of that can be expected. The photography crew went on about their filming trek for the day, but when they got to the big bear's fishing hole, he wasn't there. They were bummed, but they couldn't just return with a bunch of film of the same bear doing the same thing anyway. That would be boring. They finished up with a few shots of a sow and cubs that they watched for the afternoon and returned back to camp just before evening. As the men made it down the hill to the main trail back to camp, they noticed more bear scat. It was the big boar's tracks, and this time his tracks were in their boot tracks from their hike up this morning. That evening, the Russian guide asked Michio if he would please consider sleeping inside the cabin with the rest of the crew, as the presence of the bear tracks around camp indicated a potential for danger. Michio loved the sensation of being outside and sleeping in his tent under the stars, so he politely declined. After all, he had had over 20 years of filming and photography with bears and other wildlife this way, and wasn't feeling threatened by the presence of the bear. The guide deferred to the preferences of the experienced photographer, and they all retired to their beds for some rest and relaxation. After dinner and conversation, Michio made his way the short distance from the cabin back to his tent. He didn't have any food in his tent and nothing else tempting for bears like sweets or flavored drinks. He didn't pack a firearm and didn't see a need for bear spray while you're sleeping. He positioned his sleeping bag just beneath the window in the tent so he could stare out at the stars and feel the fresh air on his face while he slept. He curled up in his sleeping bag in his tent on the shore of Lake Kuril and allowed the lapping of the water on the shore to lull him to sleep. As Michio slept, around 4 a.m., the big bear crept up on him and sniffed his scent through the tent window. Upon smelling Michio, the bear pounced on the sleeping man, biting his shoulder and swatting him with his paws. The bear tore apart Michio's tent while wrenching the man from his sleeping bag. Michio yelled in pain and woke his sleeping teammates. The Russian guide and other campers ran outside and watched by flashlight as Michio disappeared into the woods, dragging behind the running bear. The rest of the crew could only look on as their associate and friend's life was taken before their very eyes. Authorities were notified and recovery crews were assembled and helicoptered into the site. Michio's mutilated and partially consumed body was recovered as well as his tissues from the bear's stomach. The bear was put down at the site. The attack was deemed a strictly predatory attack. In fact, the bear followed and stalked the crew members for several days, as evidence shows. The world lost not only an amazing photographer, videographer, and children's book author, but a father, son, and husband. He is survived by his wife, Naoko, and a son, Homa, both of Fairbanks, Alaska, USA.
Episode, we will visit a place we rarely go to, and to a time in which nature was just outside our door. This mountainous and untamed area is crowded by stands of Ermines birch, Sakhalin fir, and Izo spruce. Sika deer crowd the hills aside the Japanese sero, which is a deer-like wild goat and the national symbol of the nation. Many of the animals here form their own unique subspecies based on the isolation of the island from any other sources of genetic input. This means that Izo red fox, Japanese macaque, and the Izo brown bear are unique. This species of brown bear is renowned for its aggressiveness and hostility towards human beings. The problem started arising on the Akita family farm in the early winter of 1915. The family horse was panicked by a disturbance in the barn, and the family patriarch rushed out to witness a large bear fleeing his barn, having raided the family cache of corn. This area was still very primitive, and animal incursions were not unheard of. A few days later, the big bear reappeared. Being concerned for the horse, Mr. Akita rounded up some volunteers and decided to chase the bear away for good. The men positioned themselves for a kill shot and fired shots striking the bear. The bear fled, and the men went to bed for the night to allow the bear to die. In the morning, they resumed tracking the bear and followed the blood trail for some time before a snowstorm set in. The bear was headed toward a nearby mountain, and the men assumed that that would be the last they'd heard of him, since they'd given him plenty of reason to avoid further contact with humans. On December 9th of the same year, the Oda family was enjoying basic farm chores around mid-morning. The family matriarch, Abimayu, was watching an infant named Mikio. They were enjoying the warmth of the fire when the injured and hungry brown bear knocked down the door and growled and pawed at them. The bear backed Mayu across the room and reached into her arms and bit the head of the baby, killing her instantly. Mayu fought with all of her might, throwing firewood and just about anything else she could get her hands on at the beast. She was obviously no match for the giant brown bear, as it simply knocked her down and tore her to pieces in her own home. Mayu was dragged from the house into the nearby forest. It was reported that the floor of her home was covered in her blood. A 30-man search party was organized on the following day. They had no sooner entered the forest before running into the brown bear. The bear was clearly guarding a food cache from them. 5 of the volunteers fired at the giant before the bear could be driven off from the scene. The men found Mayu's remains. All that was left of her was her head and portions of her lower body. The bear had consumed the rest of her corpse overnight. Amongst the villagers, the obvious concern was that the bear would now think of people as a food source. They mustered a hunting party of 50 farmers to rid their village of this bear once and for all. The rallying point was the Oda farmhouse. The bear appeared, as expected, at around 8 p.m., but the hunting party was in such disarray that only a single shot was fired before the bear escaped. The party immediately left the neighboring Mikyu homestead and started following the bear's tracks downstream in the dark of night. The Miyuki matriarch, Yayo, was preparing a meal while the village men were chasing the bear. She held her son, Umikichi, in her arms while she worked. Yayo was startled by a noise outside, and before she could check it out, the giant brown bear crashed through a window and into her house. As chaos ensued in the home, the contents of the meal she was preparing spilled onto the fire, extinguishing it, and the oil lamp for lighting was put out as well. The house was dark, and Yayo's sons were seeking her protection. She tripped over them in the confusion. The bear immediately began biting and clawing Yayo and her son. Oto was the only man who was left in the Miyuki home to protect them. Oto burst into the room, and the bear immediately redirected its rage at him. This allowed Yayo and her sons to beat a hasty escape. Oto hid behind furniture, but the bear raked him with his claws. Others in the house were not so lucky. The Sato family was seeking shelter with Yayo and her children. The bear killed the fourth Sato boy and bit his older brother. During this frenzied attack, the bear also mauled and killed the third oldest son of the Miyuki clan, Kinzo. The Sato family matriarch, Toke, was with child. During her attack, she begged the bear to kill her, but leave her baby unharmed. The bear killed and ate parts of her, but left her baby, which was later pulled from her womb alive, but died shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, the hunting party thought they were following the bear tracks downstream and discovered they had not followed the right bear. They ran into Yayo, who was severely injured, as they returned, and she advised them of the attack. The men quickly surrounded the Miyuki house and could hear the bear attacking the occupants inside the dark home. They decided to burn the building with the bear inside, but Yayo talked them out of it, as there may be survivors in there. 10 of the men posted up at the front door, and the remaining men went around the back of the home. The men at the back of the house decided to drive the bear out of the front of the home by making a bunch of noise. The clatter scared the bear out the front door into the crowd of men posted up there. These men were all lined up, though, and could not shoot for fear of hitting the men in front of them. The man in the front of the line tried to shoot, but his rifle misfired. In this confusion, the bear fled right through the mob and into the night, without being hit by a single bullet. The men entered the home by birch bark torchlight and beheld the gruesome scene inside. 2 of the children were injured, but lived. The death toll now stood at 6 people, including the pregnant Miss Sato. The village gathered at the nearby school and triaged people at the Tsuji farm. Mr. Sato, still unaware of the devastation wrought on his family, had found lodging at a nearby hotel for the night. Upon returning to Senkabetsu, he joined the hunting party to find the bear. They waited into the night at the Miyuki homestead, but the bear never showed back up. On December 12th, local authorities organized a rifle team to dispatch the man-killer. The group immediately departed for Senkabetsu. The party resolved to find and kill this bear immediately. The team decided to try to bait the bear into shooting distance with the corpse of one of the victims, over the objections of the victims' families. The plan appeared to be working, as the bear did peek into the house, now occupied by the rifle team, but quickly fled the scene back to the forest. The plan was a miserable failure, and only further traumatized the victims' families. Mr. Miyuki consulted a local bear hunter, Mr. Yamamoto, to recruit his help. The woodsman declined due to selling his firearm for money to buy alcohol. Mr. Yamamoto indicated that he believed it was the same bear that had killed 3 women in a previous incident. He deduced this because the bear had a hallmark that would mark its victims with a diagonal slash from shoulder to hip, or Kisakake, as the bear would be dubbed. On December 13th, the party discovered the ransacked Oda family home. The family's winter stores of food had been devoured, and the bear tore up 8 neighboring homes, but remained a ghost in the forest. The men noticed the bear was spreading his reign of terror downstream and set up a defensive barricade. Standing guard all night, one of the guards noticed a shadow across the river, and to avoid shooting a human, he spoke to it. When he received no response, the men opened fire, and the shadow melted back into the forest. In the morning, a squad of men investigated the site where the shadow was seen. They observed giant bear tracks and blood in the snow. They knew they had wounded Kisakake once again. In an attempt to beat another prevailing snowstorm, the men started tracking the bear at once. The bear hunter, Mr. Yamamoto, tracked the bear down and crept within about 60 feet of the sleeping man-killer. He fired his rifle 2 times, and his bullet struck the giant in the heart and in the head. The terror and violence was finally ended. A necropsy was performed on Kisakake's carcass. The bear stood 8 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 749 pounds. Tissues from his victims were pulled from his stomach, and his skull and skin were kept as artifacts to the event. The artifacts were eventually lost, and no trace of Kisakake remains. As a result of the attack, some of the survivors died from their wounds, and eventually the town was abandoned. Experts believe Kisakake woke from hibernation due to lack of food. It is believed that human settlement affected the bear's natural source of food. After reviewing the details of this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think Kisakake was awakened from hibernation, even though he weighed 749 pounds? Do you attribute the bear's ability to escape the hunters to ineptitude, or was it due to the terror giant bears stir in our minds? How do you think the bear knew when to make noise and when to be silent? What would the villagers have done if they didn't have the snow to show where Kisakake had traveled? I will gladly read and answer your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Japanese island of Hokkaido. On the southern part of the island is Mount Daisingen. It is only around 3,500 feet high and is the location of our episode today. This mountainous area is shaded by forests of Sakhalin fir, Sakhalin spruce, Japanese oak, birch, and painted maple trees. The island of Hokkaido is home to several unique species found nowhere else on Earth. Cicadere and wild boar are common here, but the giant salamander, Ezo flying squirrel, tanuki, and the amami rabbit are Hokkaido exclusives. The predators here include the Ezo red fox, tanuki, weasels, and brown bears. An alarming trend has been developing on the island over the last few years, which has reached its climax. Government policy on bear management has been successful in increasing bear numbers. Habitat recovery is also progressing as people leave rural areas for more lucrative jobs in the cities. This leaves the agricultural buffer around cities vacant of humans and their activities. Without regular contact with people, brown bears here have become emboldened and have started to attack people like they've never before. On October 29, 2022, 22-year-old college student Kanado Yanaki was driving to Mount Daisingen for a hike. He was a fourth-year student at Hokkaido University in Fukushima and was studying fisheries management. Kanado enjoyed hiking and mountain climbing. He was intelligent and adventurous, loving anything outside. Kanado loaded his gear and boarded his vehicle for the 45-minute drive to the parking lot at the trailhead on Mount Daisingen. The winding road rises from the coastal highway at sea level to just below the peak at 3,500 feet high. Each bend in the road represented an ever-improving view of the forest eventually giving way to the ocean. Upon arriving at the trailhead, Kanado parked his car and headed up the trail toward the peak, but he was not seen again after leaving his home. Earlier in the summer of 2022, 54-year-old fisherman Toshihiro Nishikawa was fishing for Sakhalin taimen in Lake Shimoronai in the northern part of the island. Taimen are similar to North American steelhead, but are much larger. They can reach 6 feet in length and weigh 100 pounds. They're trophy fish valued around the world. Nishikawa was dropped off to fish alone by a fishing guide he had contracted to help him on his fishing trip. As the fishing guide piloted his boat away, he observed a brown bear near the location. He reached out to Nishikawa by way of radio, but was unsuccessful in contacting him. Deciding the bear likely wouldn't be a problem, he piloted his boat out of the area to leave Nishikawa in peace to fish. A few hours later, the fishing guide returned to pick up Nishikawa, but couldn't raise him on the radio. Searchers were sent to the lake and found his severed head submerged in the water. A short distance away, a brown bear was observed chewing on his waders. A search for his body was unsuccessful. Local police organized a bear hunt and killed a brown bear, but weren't sure if it was the bear that killed Nishikawa. Authorities issued public warnings to citizens who were planning on venturing into the forests. On October 31, 2022, just a few days after Kanado disappeared, 3 firefighters were out for a hike on Mount Daisingen. They climbed about halfway up the mountain when they decided to sit down and rest. While they were resting, a brown bear emerged from the brush and began attacking the men. The bear first knocked one of the firefighters down and began to bite him furiously. When one of his friends tried to intervene, the bear immediately pounced on the second firefighter, biting and clawing him as well. As it menaced the rest of the men, one of the firefighters pulled out a knife he'd been packing. The bear began to close in on him, and he slashed at the bear, striking it in the neck. His swipe with his knife severed a major artery and sent the bear fleeing while spraying blood from the neck wound. The firefighters made their way back down the mountain and reported the aggressive brown bear to authorities. This brazen attack by the brown bear sparked an intensive search for its body. They weren't positive it had died, but based on its reported injuries, thought it may have succumbed to them.
As searchers climbed Mount Isagan slopes, they found a dead brown bear. It was about the same size as the bear that attacked the firemen, but didn't have a knife wound in its neck. They found a second bear of a much smaller size nearby, also dead. After canvassing the area, they stumbled upon Kanado's body. The 22-year-old had been savaged by a brown bear and partially eaten. The bear had cached his body under dirt and sticks to be consumed later. Forensic crews gathered Kanado's corpse and the carcasses of the two bears. They also took evidence from the attack site for analysis. Kanado's cause of death was declared to be due to blood loss from the hundreds of wounds inflicted by the brown bear. His death was not fast and may have taken hours before his passing. The scientists examined the larger bear and found it to have no major injuries. They were most interested in finding a knife wound in its neck, but when they searched its carcass, they couldn't find one. The contents of its stomach were examined, and it was determined to have consumed Kanado's flesh. The smaller bear was not found to have ingested flesh from Kanado's corpse, but its cause of death was not listed in any source I could find. With all the evidence and analysis, authorities had some difficulty in making sense of it all. Was the larger bear the same bear that had attacked the firefighters and had killed and eaten Kanado? Or had that bear and its cub been killed by a larger bear that had ambushed the firefighters after killing and eating Kanado? After putting the puzzle together, the most likely scenario emerged. The larger bear must have attacked and killed Kanado, afterward caching his body for food. Then the sow and her cub came to feed off Kanado's remains. It must have killed the sow and cub in defense of Kanado's corpse as its food cache. It was most likely the same bear that had ambushed the firefighters and had likely died elsewhere after suffering the grievous knife wound to its neck. Searchers never found the carcass of the big bear with the knife wound to his neck, but it is assumed that the wound ultimately led to his death. Since April 2022, 160 injuries and 3 human deaths have occurred in Hokkaido. Kanado's death was the first human fatality to bear attack in over a decade in all of Japan. This rapid increase in attacks is attributed to a dwindling food supply and human populations fleeing agricultural areas around cities. Authorities in Japan have become so desperate to stop bear attacks that they have turned to technology for a solution. They've started using monster wolves. These huge robot wolves have glowing red eyes and sound a howl that reaches 90 decibels. Monster wolves are stationed near known bear traffic areas. They view the monster wolves as a form of scarecrow to frighten the bears away. There are an estimated 6,500 to 10,000 brown bears on the island of Hokkaido alone. These bears are unique as they are darker in color than other brown bears and have a longer skull and lower slope in their forehead. They can stand 7.5 feet in height and weigh up to 1,100 pounds. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the agricultural areas now being vacated are bringing brown bears closer to cities on Hokkaido? What is emboldening brown bears to attack humans in Japan? Is the lack of management of brown bear numbers leading to overpopulation and increasing attacks on humans? Do you think robot wolves are a great idea to deter bears? I will be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Jizo River in the Gunma Prefecture in central Japan. This area is at a relatively high elevation and is part of the Kanto Plain. It's covered in dense forest, so thick that rivers can't be seen on satellite images. There are small farms scattered across this area, and many houses. Struggling to preserve its natural state, Gunma still retains 14% of its territory in national parks. Gunma territory totals a little over 2,400 square miles and holds nearly 2 million people, which puts the human population density at almost 800 people per square mile. This area receives about 45 inches of rainfall each year and has an average temperature of 57 degrees Fahrenheit. This wet and warm climate supports forests of moss-covered cypress trees, umbrella pine, hemlock, white pine, and yew trees. Deciduous trees that flourish here include oak and camphor, as well as other hardwoods. The swamps host Japanese sero, which is a unique-looking antelope. Sika deer and macaque monkeys can be seen dashing through the forests and haunting the trees. The predators in this area include the tanuki, Asiatic black bears, and massive brown bears.
The bears that call Gunma Province rely heavily on skunk cabbage and bamboo shoots for the bulk of the plant material in their diets. Patches of these plants grow in concentrations that entice the bears to feed there, and which may be defended by the bears from interlopers into what they view as their food. Local human foragers also hunt for the tender bamboo shoots, creating a potential for tense standoffs and attacks by the bears. At 1:45 p.m. on Thursday, September 1st, 2016, 63-year-old fisherman Atsushi Aoki was enjoying casting his line along the Jizo River. He'd caught a few fish and was focusing on catching more as he walked along the riverbanks. Aoki was a slight man, standing only 5 feet 6 inches tall, but given the average height of a Japanese male is 5 feet 7.5 inches, he was close to normal for the population. For many years, Aoki had studied the self-defense art of karate and had achieved his black belt in the discipline, which is the highest rank. Karate originated on the Japanese island of Okinawa to the south and has spread throughout the world, teaching self-discipline and respect as part of its core values. Many of the strikes and movements karate practitioners learn are assembled in patterned movements incorporated into strike combinations. Karate students practice these movements thousands of times to try to train their bodies to respond to threats on short notice. As Aoki fished, he had his back to the thick bamboo and grasses that grew beneath the canopy of forest above him. Focusing on catching his next fish, Aoki was distracted from the river by a rustling in the bushes only a few feet behind him. Aoki turned to look at what was making the noise, and likely expected to see any number of small animals or birds that frequent the forest. What he saw instead was a huge Asiatic black bear emerging from the bamboo, growling as it closed in on him. As soon as their eyes met, the bear began bouncing toward him. As it came, Aoki noticed its rounded ears that reminded him of a teddy bear, albeit a huge and very aggressive teddy bear. Towering over Aoki, the bear stood at 6 feet 3 inches in height and weighed in at about 320 pounds. With a quick strike of its left paw, the bear opened up gashes on the right side of Aoki's head and knocked the agile sensei flat on his face. Now keep in mind, Aoki wasn't carrying a firearm and didn't carry bear spray, as the bears in the area aren't known to stalk human beings. His only weapons he could have improvised a defense with were his fishing poles and his hands. He opted to utilize his hands as his training had taught him to do. As soon as Aoki fell on his chest, the bear cuffed him with its paws, which flipped him over onto his back. Aoki kicked at the bear, which brought his foot within biting distance. The bear clamped its jaws onto his right lower leg and drove its teeth into his flesh. Incensed by the jolting pain and recognition of the bear's intentions, Aoki sprung back to his feet as soon as the bear released its first bite. The man realized that he had to kill the bear, or it would kill him. Due to his training, Aoki assumed his karate defense stance with his right hand forward and feet apart. As the dueling duo circled each other, the bear lunged forward and wrapped its paws around Aoki's shoulders. It raked its claws across his back, opening up gashes as it bit into his right shoulder. Aoki pushed back on the bear, but it was immovable and easily overpowered him each time he tried to force it in any direction. Each time he reached toward the bear, it bit holes in his arms as it blocked each of Aoki's attacks. Seeing an opening, Aoki reached up and struck it with a punch right between the eyes. The bear retreated a few feet and eyed Aoki up and down for a few seconds. It stood on its hind feet and stretched out its paws as if it were taking its own martial arts stance. Aoki wasn't going to wait to see what move the bear was going to do next. He jabbed out with 2 of his fingers toward the bear's eyes. His strikes were powerful and accurate, coming straight toward the bear, and he repeatedly jabbed the bear in its most vulnerable place. It didn't take long before the bear decided that Aoki had won the fight and fled into the forest. Realizing he had won the fight, Aoki focused on assessing his injuries and getting medical attention. He rounded up his fishing gear and even remembered to pick up his stringer of fish. After hiking back to his car, he loaded his gear and catch of fish before heading toward the nearest hospital in the town of Naganahara. Upon arriving at the hospital, Aoki calmly walked into the emergency room entrance, sporting his blood-spotted and tattered clothes. The medical staff listened to him recount his encounter with the bear as they cleaned his wounds and closed them with sutures. Within a few hours, Aoki was released to heal at his home. As for the bear, there was no action taken against it, and authorities undoubtedly figured it had learned its lessons. I guess they figured losing an eye had been lesson enough for it. The police did issue a public statement following Aoki's battle with the black bear. They urged people to quietly walk away if confronted by a bear. They also indicated that under no circumstances should anyone try to fight a bear. It's kind of a statement as to the toughness of the Japanese people that the authorities would even think they have to make such a public notice. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, the stanza from a James Brown song comes to mind. I don't know karate, but I know crazy. Do you think Mr. Miyagi's crane technique would have knocked this black bear out like it did Johnny Lawrence in the movie Karate Kid? Do you think this attack was predatory or defensive? Was the bear after Aoki's fish? Do you think there is a connection between Aoki's age of 63 and the bear's height of 6 feet 3? This eerie pattern may be a case for David Paulides. I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.